You are standing in front of someone. You cannot speak. Not one word exists yet. And somehow, you still need them to understand that a lion is coming. This is not a hypothetical. This was your ancestors' entire reality for hundreds of thousands of years. No grammar, no vocabulary, no shared code of any kind. Just two bodies, two sets of eyes, and an emergency. So how did they do it? How did a species with nothing but grunts and gestures build the foundation for everything you now say without thinking? The answer is stranger, older, and far more physical than you'd expect. Start with your own body for a second. Right now, without meaning to, you are communicating. Your posture, your breathing, the direction of your eyes. Long before any word existed, this was the entire system. Anthropologist Michael Tomasello spent decades studying how humans, unlike any other primate, developed something called joint attention. That's the ability to both look at the same object and know that the other person knows you're looking at it too. It sounds simple, it is not. Chimpanzees rarely do this. Your ancestors did it constantly, and it became the hidden scaffolding underneath language itself. Picture two early humans near a riverbank. One spots fruit in a tree. She doesn't grunt, she points. Her companion follows her finger, then looks back at her face to confirm the shared discovery. That loop, point, follow, confirm, is not instinct. It's a negotiation. It's the first primitive sentence, written entirely in gesture. Here's where it gets strange. For a long time, researchers assumed spoken language came first, and gesture was just a backup system. But the evidence tells a different story. Studies of deaf children who invent their own home sign systems without ever being taught a formal language show something remarkable. These children spontaneously create structure, word order, repetition for emphasis, even something resembling grammar. This suggests the architecture for language existed in the body and the brain long before sound became its primary vehicle. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What if speech wasn't the beginning of language at all? What if it was just the moment language finally got a better delivery system? Now think about sound itself, stripped of words. A sharp intake of breath, a low warning hum, a rising pitch that means excitement, and a falling one that means calm. Psychologist and evolutionary biologist Robin Dunbar has argued that these early vocal signals evolved out of something surprisingly intimate: grooming. In primate groups, physical grooming builds trust and social bonds, one touch at a time. But grooming has a hard limit. You can only groom one individual at a time, and early human groups were growing too large for that to keep everyone connected. Dunbar's theory suggests that vocal sound, rhythmic, soothing, shared, became a kind of grooming you could do with your voice instead of your hands. A hum that reached 5 people at once instead of one. You can still feel the residue of this today. Think about the last time someone hummed while working beside you, or the way a crowd naturally falls into unison during a chant. That is not decoration. That is ancient social glue, older than any sentence you have ever spoken. There's a deeper layer buried in this history, and it starts with something you probably take for granted every single day: your voice with a baby. Cognitive scientist Dean Falk proposed what's known as the putting the baby down hypothesis. Early hominin mothers, unlike other primates, likely could not carry their infants everywhere while foraging, especially once bipedalism freed their hands, but also meant babies lost the ability to cling to fur. So mothers began setting infants down and using vocal sound, rhythmic, high-pitched, comforting, to reassure them from a distance. That soft rising and falling melody is strikingly similar to what you now call motherese, the sing-song voice adults use instinctively with infants across virtually every culture on Earth. Stop and consider that for a moment. The gentle voice you unconsciously use with a crying baby may be one of the oldest communication systems your species ever built. Not a word in it, just melody, tone, and rhythm carrying meaning across distance, before language had syntax to carry it instead. So if gesture came first and melody came next, where does actual meaning-carrying sound begin? This is where things turn genuinely strange. Primatologist Sue Savage-Rumbaugh spent years working with bonobos, most famously one named Kanzi, who learned to communicate using symbols on a keyboard, not through direct training, but by simply observing his mother's lessons. Kanzi eventually used hundreds of symbols meaningfully, sequenced them in consistent ways, and even understood spoken English requests he'd never explicitly been taught. This doesn't mean bonobos have language the way you do, but it does mean the raw cognitive machinery, the ability to associate symbol with meaning, to hold intention, to sequence ideas, existed long before modern humans evolved. Language wasn't a lightning bolt that struck one lucky species. It was a slow accumulation of tools your ancestors were already carrying, which means somewhere between gesture, melody, and shared attention, one final ingredient had to arrive to tip the system into full language. And that ingredient wasn't a new sound, it was trust. You cannot build a shared word for danger, or fire, or love, unless you trust that the other person means the same thing you do when they use it. Every symbol is a tiny act of faith between two minds. Anthropologists studying the emergence of proto-language often point to exactly this. Cooperation had to exist before complex communication could be worth the effort. Why invent an elaborate signal for a shared future hunt if nobody around you can be trusted to show up? This reframes everything you thought you knew about your earliest ancestors. They weren't grunting cavemen slowly fumbling toward Shakespeare. They were relationship engineers, building layer after layer of shared meaning long before a single formal word existed. Eye contact was infrastructure. Humming was social currency. A mother's melody was the first lullaby and possibly the first syntax. Pointing at fruit was a negotiation in trust. And here is the twist that should genuinely unsettle you. You still run on this exact same operating system. When you walk into a room and instantly read the tension in someone's shoulders before they say a word, that's not some modern soft skill. That's the original language, still fully active underneath the one you learned in school. When you comfort a crying child with tone instead of vocabulary, you are not simplifying language. You are reaching for the version that came first. When your voice rises with excitement or drops with seriousness, you are not decorating your sentences. You are speaking in the oldest dialect your species has ever known, the one that existed before dialects existed at all. Think about your last real argument with someone you love. How much of it happened in the words themselves, and how much happened in the pause before you spoke, the tightness in your voice, the way you looked away or didn't. You were using two languages layered on top of each other the entire time, and one of them is older than any civilization that has ever existed. Modern researchers studying infant development consistently find that babies respond to tone, rhythm, and facial expression months before they understand a single word. In other words, every human being alive today personally relives this entire evolutionary journey in their first year of life. You didn't learn to communicate by learning words first. You learned it by learning trust first, exactly like your ancestors did, hundreds of thousands of years ago, on a riverbank, pointing at fruit, hoping someone was watching. So the next time you find the right words failing you, notice what your body does instead. Notice the silence that says more than the sentence would have. That silence is not a gap in communication. It is communication in its purest, oldest, most honest form, and it has been fluent in you since before you ever learned to speak.